Got a few pages, I'm not going to talk about them, a few pages of biography that you need to read, get familiar with, for purposes of quiz and stuff like that. I think 3 of you already started taking extra credit quiz, but I closed it temporarily. I'm reopening. It's being reopened. Today's Wednesday. Either today or tomorrow. When the quizzes are ready, or when they're, what's the phrase I want? When you get on your D2L homepage, on the right side of the page should be a calendar. The calendar will say when quizzes are coming up and such. Sometimes those, that'll just say the quizzes that are coming up. It won't say that they're ready, okay? Which you have to look at it carefully, because it'll say something like opens or begins, and that'll be the date that you can start to take it. I think though, the first one, the extra credit one, I think it opens tomorrow at midnight. And then you have 3 or 4 days. I think it's due Sunday night. Again, it's optional, but it's possible 10 points extra credit, and it gives you an idea of what the quizzes will look like, okay? Okay, let's start with this short story, and hopefully, I think the plan is to do all of it today. Yes. Written in 1836. Hawthorne he'd been writing, before then some. He really gets big in the late 1840s and early 1850s. Minister's Black Veil is the title. Notice it has a subtitle, a parable. Okay? And then there's a note down at the bottom of the page for linked to that subtitle. The note says, another clergyman in New England, Mr. Joseph Moody of York, Maine, who died about 80 years since, so that would be 1756, made himself remarkable by the same eccentricity that is here related of the Reverend Mr. Hooper. In his case, that is in this other guy's case, however, the symbol had a different import. Okay? In early life, he had accidentally killed a beloved friend, and from that day till the hour of his own death, he hid his face from men. Okay? You read that note, and how is it presented? What do footnotes usually do? Give you additional information, maybe tell you some kind of biographical stuff or publication history, that kind of thing. What else do they do? They're meant to explain. So if they're meant to explain, you kind of take them at face value. That is, you're being told the truth about something. With Hawthorne, you can't really assume that that is true. Okay? Scarlet Letter, and I believe House of the Seven Gables, both begin with a kind of like a pre-chapter, a prologue, so to speak, that tell you the history of how the author of the story came upon the story. Okay? In House of the Seven Gables, Scarlet Letter, it's the person was working, etc., and he finds this manuscript. And the manuscript is the story of the Scarlet Letter. It's total fiction. He didn't find the manuscript. He wrote it himself. What he's doing is he's kind of creating this almost like meta truth about it, this thing to give it kind of weight and solidity. Like, this is really, really true. With Hawthorne, you can't assume that that's actually the case. So, I have no idea whether or not this guy, Mr. Joseph Moody of York, Maine, ever actually really lived. My gut feeling is probably not. Okay? Go back up to the subtitle. A parable. What's a parable? Who famously told parables? Jesus. Why did Jesus tell parables? To relate to people? What's another word for a parable?
A lesson.
Okay. It's a story to tell a lesson or to relate a lesson. Or at least that's the popular understanding. Go back to the Gospels in the New Testament and read the parables. Read the story around the parables. That is what happens before Jesus tells a parable, what happens in the parable, and what happens after Jesus tells the parable. And one of the things you'll find pretty soon is in almost every instance, nobody understands what the parable means. In other words, if it's a story to teach a lesson, and yet nobody understands it, how good of a lesson does it teach? Not really. So what happens in the Gospels is after Jesus tells the parable, he and the disciples, by the way, are not just the 12 disciples. He had scores of disciples. At one point, he sends out 70 disciples, okay? So he goes aside with the disciples and they go, what did it mean? Tell us the meaning of, for example, one of the parables is about leavened bread. And if bread loses its leaven, it's yeast, okay? It won't rise and stuff. And the disciples think Jesus is telling us because they forgot to pack bread for while they were walking along on their journey. He's like, come on, guys. And so he explains it. In most of the parables, Jesus takes the disciples aside and he explains what it means. And he does with a phrase, to you it has been given to know. In other words, I'm setting you aside so that you understand this. He often begins the parables to the crowds, the people who are just coming out to see this wonderful new teacher, with the phrase. Anyone know what the phrase is? Let him who has ears to hear, hear. In other words, if you don't have the ears to hear, you don't understand. The majority of the people don't understand. What do they think Jesus is there for? To institute this new kingdom, to be the new David sitting on his... It's not the point, okay? So a parable isn't simply, the way it's thought of in popular consciousness, the story to tell a story. It is a story, but often the way the parable works is via paradox or oxymoron. You gotta look deeper into it. So, Hawthorne is telling us this is a parable. One of the things that means is it's not what it first appears to be. You have to look at it slightly askance, like over here, peripheral vision. You got to take a look at it from a bunch of different perspectives. So, the sexton had stood, are we told the setting? Do we know literally where this occurs? We get, at some point, we get the name of the town, Milford, I believe it is, and then we get names of surrounding towns, so we have a geographical area. Do we have a time period? Are we told specifically in what year? No, we're not. The setting gives us some of that indication, however, because of what happens. Everybody goes to church. It's not 2024, because not everybody goes to church anymore, okay? The language describing the church gives us an idea. It's set in kind of a Puritan setting. The way people are described, Goodman, Brown, Goodman, etc. That's a set specific time period. So, the sexton stood in the porch of Milford Meeting House. It's a meeting house. It's not called a church. Why not? Anybody know what branch of Christianity meets in places called meeting houses? And I'm not saying that Hawthorne is intentionally setting this branch of Christianity as the setting for this church. Okay? Quakers. what are called the Society of Friends. They meet in meeting houses. They don't necessarily call them churches. Okay? So, a sexton is somebody who's responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the church building or the meeting house building. All right? He's standing there in the porch, pulling the bell. Why is he pulling a bell? Not time to leave, time to come. He's ringing the church bell. That tells the village, time to get ready. Church is getting ready to start. Okay? And we're told the old people of the village come stooping along the street. Why? Because they're old. Old people don't walk upright like this. They're kind of hunched over. Okay? Notice, children with bright faces tripped merrily beside their parents. They're kind of hopping and skipping, because they're full of energy. Beside their parents, or they mimic a graver gait, that is, or they walk like those old people. Often when you mimic somebody, why do you do it? Yeah, tease, make fun. All right? What else? Spruce bachelors, that is, young unmarried men, decked out, look nice, look sidelong at the pretty maidens. They're not staring, but they're kind of glancing on either side, and fancied that the Sabbath sunshine made them, the pretty maidens, prettier than on weekdays. When the throng had mostly streamed into the porch, the sexton began to toll the bell. So what's the difference between lustily ringing the bell and tolling the bell? The one is like a general alarm. All right, folks, time to start getting ready to come to church. The other one is like a countdown. Okay? So after the lusty ringing of the bell, he stops. And now it's like 5 minutes till. And you get this boom, boom, boom. It gives people a time warning, so to speak. Okay? And he's now looking at the parson's door. The parson lives in what's called the parsonage, the home provided by the community, by the church community, for the preacher. He's waiting for that parson to open the door and start making his way out. Okay? The first glimpse of the clergyman's figure was the signal for the bell to cease its summons. He comes out the door, and the sexton stops ringing. Everybody knows at that point he's on his way. Okay? But what a good parson. Hooper got upon his face. The sexton cries out. And everybody turns and looks at him. And beheld the semblance of Mr. Hoomer pacing slowly his meditative way towards the meeting house. What does it mean to pace slowly his meditative way? He's walking at his own speed. What else? Why is his way meditative? Is he as he walks? No, he's not doing this but he's thinking. Okay? His own meditative way is telling us something about the person. This guy's a thinker. He's wrapped up in his mind. Whatever he does, he's just very deliberate about it. Consciously thinking all the time. Okay? And with one accord, the people looking at him, we're told, started. What does it mean with one accord? Literally, accord means in agreement. Ultimately, it goes back to with one heart. They all do what? They jump. Or maybe they don't physically jump, but they're awestruck as they see him. Expressing more wonder than if some strange minister were coming to dust the cushions of Mr. Hooper's pulpit. Goodman Gray, are you sure it's our person? I mean, where'd it go? If the guy's walking towards them, I don't have a black handkerchief, but if the guy's walking towards them like this, how do they know but it's him. Clothes might look the same, but, if you're like this, can't necessarily be recognized. The section. Certainly it's good, Mr. Hooper. He was to have exchange of pulpits with Parson Shute of Westbury. Parson Shute sent to excuse himself yesterday, being to preach a funeral sermon. In other words, he wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to exchange pulpits with another guy. But the other guy canceled because he had a sudden funeral to attend to. The cause of so much amazement may appear sufficiently slight. So now the narrator tells us what's driving everybody crazy. Mr. Hooper, gentlemanly person of about 30, though still a bachelor, was dressed with due clerical neatness. In other words, nothing was out of place in terms of his appearance, what he was wearing. As if a careful wife had starched his band, that probably means like a white band that some Episcopal priests and Catholic priests wear in their collar. Okay? But it could also not mean that. It could just mean one of these collars that doesn't fold over like this, just comes straight up, and it is so starched it stands. Okay? And brushed the weekly dust from his Sunday's garb. There was but one thing remarkable in his appearance. Swathed about his forehead, hanging down over his face, so low as to be shaken by his breath, so it goes down over his mouth and starts up here. So all the major parts of the face that one would recognize are hidden. So low as to be shaken by his breath, Mr. Hooper had on a black veil. On a nearer view, it seemed to consist of 2 folds of crepe kind of material, which entirely concealed his features except the mouth and chin. Okay? Question. If we are told it hangs so low over his face as to be shaken by his breath, how is it not covering his mouth? Is it just the breath that comes out of his nostrils? That's not going to move cloth very much. Okay? I think, could be wrong, that's just a little error in the story. That Hawthorne didn't, really visualize what he's describing. But probably did not intercept his sight farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. What's he mean by that? I can look through this, even though this is white, so it's blue, whatever other colors, and I can still generally make out shapes. Can't make out faces at all. His is made out of crepe. Crepe is a very thin material, and it's got 2 folds. So he can probably still generally make out shapes. That's why he can walk without tripping and falling over things. But it does what? It gives a darkened aspect to everything he sees. Why? Because he's looking through like black lenses. It's like sunglasses. It darkens everything. What else? With this gloomy shade before him. Gloomy shade. What do we mean by the word gloomy? It's not the same thing that Hawthorne means. If someone is described as gloomy, what are we saying about them? They're sad, they're kind of down. Something's going wrong in their life. It's not what it literally means. Gloomy, go back to the Old English, gloomy means darkened. Like in shade or in shadow. Okay? So, go back to look at that passage. With this gloomy shade, with this shadowy shadow, this darkened shadow before him, Mr. Hooper walked onward at a slow and quiet pace, stooping somewhat, looking on the ground as is customary with abstracted men. In other words, he's not walking like I am now, head up and looking forward. He's walking like this, looking downward. And the reason he's stooping is because his eyes are downward. Notice how you carry your head will physically impact how you move. If you're like this, your shoulders are going to roll forward. If you're standing up like this, your shoulders are going to stay back. Your chest will stay out. As is customary with abstracted men. Why abstracted? Because of his meditative way. His mind isn't right there on what he's looking at the ground. He's thinking of something else. What is he possibly thinking of? We don't know anything about Mr. Hooper yet, other than he walks meditatively and he's abstracted. What might be on his mind? Maybe the reason why he's put on the veil. Yet nodding kindly to those of his parishioners who still waited on the meeting house steps. So he gets to the church building, he starts going up the steps, and there are people standing on either side, and notice he nods to them. What's the nod mean? He recognizes them. He's acknowledging their presence. He's not just walking by, flipping them off like I don't give a... But they were so wonderstruck that his greeting hardly met with a return. Meaning what? They don't nod in return. They don't say, "Good morning, parson. Good morning, Reverend Hooper." They, again, because we're told they are so wonderstruck, it's like they're frozen. They're, to use an English word with its original meaning, they are astonished. Astonished literally means turned to stone. They get frozen in their place. And the sexton says, "I can't really feel as if good Mr. Hooper's face was behind that piece of crepe." What? What else would be behind it? Take the crepe away and there's just, Mr. Smith or whatever from Matrix. An old woman, "I don't like it. He's changed himself into something awful." By hiding his face. Why? Why is the face so important? Anybody know what one of the greatest curses in the Old Testament is? Flip side, what the greatest blessing is in the Old Testament? May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. That is to look you in the eye, or to look favorably upon you. The curse is, may the Lord turn his face away from you. That is to be faceless towards you, to not acknowledge you. He's changed himself into something awful by hiding his face. Goodman Gray, our person has gone mad. What have all three of these people now done? They've criticized. They've made some kind of judgment. On the basis of what? Appearance. Only appearance. Has he said anything? No. A rumor of some unaccountable phenomenon had preceded Mr. Hooper into the meeting house. In other words, before he gets in, the people who saw him come outside his door started, and it moves into the meeting house, and the rumor swirls forward so that the people in the church are expecting something strange, wondrous, odd, okay? So that all the congregation is set astir. If they are astir, let me back up. If you go to church, how do you want your demeanor to be when you go into church? How do you want your soul to be? Kind of at peace, kind of at rest. saying that church shouldn't rile you up. You know, good preaching, good singing, etc., can really rouse you. It's not that kind of riling. So that they twist their heads and look towards him as he comes down that central aisle. There's a general bustle, a rustling of the women's gowns, shuffling of the men's feet, greatly at variance with that hushed repose which should attend the entrance of the minister, according to this time period. In other words, people usually are quiet and respectful as he comes in. Now, there's all kinds of movement, all kinds of noise. And we're told, he entered with an almost noiseless step, bent his head mildly to the pews on each side. So he's nodding to each side. Why? Again, he's acknowledging the people that are there. He's not saying anything, but it's the mere tip of his head is acknowledging them. And bowed as he passed his oldest parishioner. Why does he bow? Respect your elders. This guy's lived a long life. Just doing that, he deserves respect. Okay? It was strange to observe how slowly this venerable man became conscious of something singular in the appearance of his pastor. That is, the old geezer takes him a while and he suddenly realizes something's different about his minister. He seemed not fully to partake of the prevailing wonder till Mr. Hooper had ascended the stairs and showed himself in the pulpit, face to face with his congregation. So the old guy doesn't fully realize what's happening until the parson goes up the stairs, turns around, and gets in the pulpit, and now looks face to face at the congregation. And I think what that means is he doesn't just stand up there like this, but he looks at everybody. But when he does that, what can they not see? His eyes. They can't see him looking face to face. They see the head with this veil turned. It shook. Face to face with his congregation, except for the black veil. That mysterious emblem, come on, Arm, was never once withdrawn. Two things. See, we're going to be behind today because we're not going to finish this. Mysterious and emblem. Stop. This comes from the word mystery. What's a mystery? Is it something you don't know? I don't know quantum physics. Okay, it's a mystery to me. It wasn't a mystery to Einstein.
Something unsolved.
Something unsolved. Does that mean it can be solved? There's a thing called the Fermi paradox, named after, can't remember his first name, Antonio, Fermi physicist, who famously, at a lunch with a group of other physicists back in the 1950s, they were talking about life in the universe. And Fermi threw out this paradox. If the universe is as big as old, etc., where are all the other people? How are we the only ones here? Because the conversation was, there's got to be hundreds of thousands of other forms of intelligent life. And his point was, if that's true, why haven't we seen them? Why haven't we met them? Why haven't they contacted us? Okay? It's a paradox. The mystery, literally, is something that cannot be explained. Cannot. A detective novel is not a mystery. A whodunit. Agatha Christie did not write mysteries. She wrote whodunits. Because at the end of each novel, you figure out who done it. Okay? Here's an example of a mystery. Within the Christian tradition, the idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, three persons. Not enough duct tape in the world to keep your mind together when you really start to try to figure that out. The Incarnation, Christmas, God, uncontainable, omniscient, all-present, powerful, etc., becomes a 8-pound, 2-ounce, 19-inch long little baby. How? You cannot logically explain that. It's an item of what? Faith. Okay? So, mysterious emblem. I see emblems all around. Do I have any? I've got the little anchor thing. It's not really an emblem. The Nike swoosh is an emblem. What does it mean? Nike. What does Nike mean? Just do it. What's it really mean? Comes from an ancient Greek goddess. Victory. Right? Because you don't want to have an emblem that says loser. You want that emblem to say, I will be victorious. Or maybe not even victory. You can also translate it as conqueror. So if you wear the Nike symbol, you're a conqueror. You will overcome. Yeah, well, two teams come out. They both have Nike symbols. One of them doesn't win. Okay? So this mysterious emblem, an emblem is a image that conveys an idea. What's the idea that the emblem, the black veil, conveys? We don't know yet. What does it convey so far to the people who see it? Hawthorne didn't have this kind of terminology. But we see a lot of, according to psychology, projection going on. What are the people doing? They're putting their meaning into this thing. They're projecting their insecurities, their fears into it. It's just a black piece of cloth, folks. Okay? And we're told it was never once withdrawn. It shook with the measured breath as he gave out the psalm. That is, he reads the psalm. It threw his obscurity between him and the holy page. What is something that is obscure? It's hidden. It's not clear. A couple other classrooms when I teach this course, I can point to the windows and say, look how obscure that is, because they're not clean. They're just covered with a film. I don't mean like a dark, I mean like dirt and stuff, right? They obscure what? We're told. Him and the holy page. That is, the Bible. As he read the scriptures and while he prayed, the veil lay heavily on his uplifted countenance. He doesn't pray hands like this, head bowed. He prays how? Looking up to God. Probably with his hands open. And it does what? It lays flat on his face at that point. So we're not told, what could the parishioners do? They could look at it and they could see the outline of his nose, outline of his cheeks maybe. And as he prays, probably, we're told it doesn't go over his mouth, so it's not going to be moving. But as he breathes while he talks, it will move some. Such was the effect of this simple piece of crepe that more than one woman of delicate nerves was forced to leave the meeting house. In other words, you have some wilting violets in here who just get so disturbed by this image they have to leave. Yet perhaps the pale-faced congregation was almost as fearful a sight to the minister as his black veil to them. Why is the congregation described as pale-faced? One, more than likely they're all white. 17th century, 18th century New England. Two, what happens when people get scared? They go white. Or their complexion loses some blood. Okay? Why else? Well, if it gets pale enough that face and facial expressions can become obscured. In other words, they kind of lose all definition. So it's like one face and another face and another face and another face, and they're all the same. And then we're told the pale-faced congregation was almost as fearful a sight to the minister as his black veil to them. Why so? We're not told why. Could it be because they look at him and all they see is the black veil? They have pale faces, and yet when he looks at them through the black veil, what does he see? It's like there's a veil covering each of them. They don't understand that. They don't get that at all. All they get is he's a freak. He's being weird. So, we're told he was a good preacher. Not great, not bad, just, he's a pretty good preacher. He tried to win his people to heaven, not through fire and brimstone, turn or burn kind of a thing, but gently exhorting them to proper behavior, blah, blah, blah. But now we're told the sermon that he delivered, this is midway, about a third of the way into the next paragraph, the sermon which he now delivered was marked by the same characteristic of style, manner, as generally he did, but there is something in the sentiment of the discourse itself, or in the imagination of the auditors, which made it greatly the most powerful effort that they had ever heard from him. In other words, it's like this guy is filled with the Spirit. And I don't mean, speaking in tongues or ranting and raving. It's just when they hear him, they feel like power coming from him. They are frozen to his words. They are waiting for every syllable to come out of his mouth. It was tinged rather more darkly than usual. Okay? So we've had gloomy, shade, dark, black. Now we have darkly. Start noticing all the terms that imply darkness, shadow, hiddenness, etc. throughout the story. It is riddled with them. Okay? Why? Because if something is in the dark, it means it's not what? In the light. It's not clear. It's not easily seen or easily understood. Rather than more darkly than usual, with the gentle gloom of Mr. Hooper's temperament. In other words, he's not the kind of person who walks around and just says, man, life is beautiful. Everything is great. The sun will always come up tomorrow. He's a little bit more of the glass is half empty mindset. Okay? And then we're told this. The subject, that is the theme of the sermon, had reference to secret sin. And those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest, and would fain conceal from our own consciousness, even forgetting that the omniscient can detect them. Notice what we're told. We, because that's the language that's used, do with/about our secret sin. What do we try to do? Keep it secret. We don't let others know. We hide it. In other words, all the language about darkness and gloominess and shadow, maybe that's referring to the things we like to keep in the dark, in the shadows, hidden, where other people can't see them. And notice it's, and those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest. Those sad mysteries, things that cannot be explained. St. Paul famously said in one of his letters, talks about, I asked God 3 times to remove this thorn from my side. Nobody knows what the thorn was. Was it a sin? We don't know. Was it a physical ailment? We don't know. I was listening to a thing yesterday, and the guy said there are some scholars who say it was his wife. We don't know that St. Paul was married. But some theorize that he was married, and his wife was a harpy. She just kept bitching at him. And he's like, please, God, take her now. You know. And he wouldn't. All right? Those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest and would fain conceal from our own conscience. That is, up here in our minds. Do you try to lie to yourself? Most people, they don't. Up here, they acknowledge, okay, that was a stupid thing to do. Or that was wrong, I shouldn't have done it. But out here, yeah, well, I had good reasons to do it. Try to justify and give excuses and such. But up here, we're kind of dodgy. From our own consciousness as well as what? From God. It's like, okay, God, I'm going to confess. I'm going to tell you all these sins. But this one over here, no, I'm keeping this one. This one's mine. You can have everything else. This one I'm keeping. Each member of the congregation, the most innocent girl, the man of hardened breast, felt as if the preacher had crept upon them behind his awful veil and discovered their hoarded iniquity of deed or thought. Hoarded iniquity. What does it mean to hoard something? Whatever that thing is. Maybe you hoard money. You keep it hidden so that the IRS can't come get it. Or you hoard something else. The hoard, literally, from the Old English, the word hoard means your treasure. Whatever that is. It doesn't have to be wealth. It can be something else. Maybe it's your physical abilities. Maybe it's your physical appearance. Maybe it's whatever. Your brains, From the youngest, most innocent girl to the most hardened sinner in the group. His sermon is like he comes up behind them and goes, boo, I see you. I know what you've done. If you're sitting there in church and you have that kind of experience, everybody's going to get the willies. Many spread their clasped hands on their bosoms. There was nothing terrible in what he said. No violence. Yet with every tremor of his melancholy voice, the hearers quaked. Why? What might the veil be acting like? Or as? A mirror. Because what do you see when you look in a mirror? Yourself. But you see what? This self. You don't see this self. In the Harry Potter novels, in the first Harry Potter novel, I taught a course in London for several years on Harry Potter, taught a course here for many years. Harry looks into a mirror. The mirror is called the Mirror of Erised, which means a mirror of desire. The Mirror of Erised doesn't show you what you appear as. It shows your heart's desire. It shows what you want to see or want to have happen more than anything else. When Harry looks into it, initially he sees himself, but then he sees something else. If you know the story, Harry's parents are dead. Harry sees his parents. And then he notices behind them grandparents, aunts, uncles. He sees the family he has never known. By the way, that little scene is really key for the entire rest of the novel. Novels, all 7 of them. I argue in my classes, what Harry's seeing there is what he really wants to have happen. He wants to be united with his family. Not here, but in death. All 7 novels, they're about one thing. Harry has to learn how to die well. All of us die. But you can die poorly, or you can die well. Okay? So, service ends. Let me back up. An unsought pathos came hand in hand with awe. Pathos, feeling. That's what it means. Okay? So sensible were the audience of some unwanted attribute in their minister that they longed for a breath of wind to blow aside the veil. They just want something to lift it up for a moment so that they could be sure this is him speaking. Almost believing that a stranger's visage would be discovered, though the form, gesture, and voice were his. So, service ends, and the people can't wait to get out of the building and away from him. Some gather in little circles talking outside. The last line of page 332. A few shake their heads. We're told they're sagacious heads. Sagacious means wise. They think they know it all, intimating that they could penetrate the mystery. Well, the thing about a mystery is it's like an onion. You just have layer after layer after layer after layer of meaning. See, the black veil is a mystery. We can't say, I can't say what specifically it is pointed to, it means. Okay? So some start to think, oh, he's wearing it because his eyes hurt. Because he studies the scriptures so much at night by lamplight or candlelight, etc. Okay? So finally he comes out. And nobody greets him like they normally do. People don't want to walk back to the parsonage with him and talk. They all scurry away. We're told that a lady says, page 333, the second paragraph, a lady says, how strange that a simple black veil, such as any woman might wear on her bonnet, should become such a terrible thing on Mr. Hooper's face. It turns him into what he is not to them. It turns him into the anti-Mr. Hooper, the thing in place of Mr. Hooper. Something must surely be amiss with Mr. Hooper's intellects, says the young woman's husband. Okay? But he says, but the strangest part of the affair is the effect of this vagary, that is, the veil. This vagary, this oddity, that even on a sober-minded man like myself, that is, I'm normally pretty clear, I'm pretty rational, pretty level-headed. And this thing gives me the willies. It makes me feel uncomfortable. The black veil, though it covers only our pastor's face, throws its influence over his whole person, makes him ghost-like. So it makes him ghost-like. What does ghost-like mean? Dead. Don't you feel it too? She says, I do, and I would not be alone with him for the world. I wonder he is not afraid to be alone with himself. Is he? Does he wear this veil so that when he's walking around in his parsonage, if he comes across a mirror, he doesn't see himself? Men sometimes are so, says her husband. That is, to be afraid to be alone. Why? What does your mind often do when there's nobody else around? Especially if you are of a meditative kind of personality. You turn inward. There's a great story written by an English writer, 17th century, Samuel Johnson, called Rasselas. Story of an Abyssinian prince. And in that, he meets an old man. And the old man tells him, stay around people. Why? Because if you don't, if you only are alone all the time, Your mind will turn inward and feast upon itself. And what he describes is someone going mad. Or another way of putting it, someone developing Alzheimer's or dementia, to where they can't quite think clearly anymore. Okay, we'll stop there because it's time. Go ahead and read barn burning for Friday. We'll finish Minister's Black Veil and start, I hope, start barn burning.